24-Hour Party People is a 2002 released biographical comedy drama directed by Michael Winterbottom.
Steve Coogan stars as Tony Wilson. For those who don't know, was a TV presenter in the 70s. Then he founded Factory Records in sort of the late 70s and into the 80s, which was responsible for signing, some pretty big bands such as Joy Division and Happy Mondays. He goes to a Sex Pistols gig in Manchester, and that sort of inspires him to start a record label. And his first signing is Joy Division. And also during this time he presented another TV show called So It Goes. It wasn't just punk music, but a lot of punk bands featured quite heavily on it. And at the time, there was no internet, so it introduced people to a lot of these bands that otherwise they might not have heard of. It sort of charts the rise of Joy Division, and then obviously Ian Curtis's untimely death. And then it jumps to the 80s when he signed to Happy Mondays, the rise and spectacular fall of that band as well, as they spaffed all the money that Factory Records gave them for an album. It's mostly about those two bands. Other bands sort of circle around that were associated with that label, but it's specifically about those two periods. And obviously during that time as well, he set up gigs. First of all, I think it was in a pub, wasn't it, in Manchester. And then when he got a bit more money, he opened a club called the Hacienda, which, for a long time was quite a famous venue for music in Manchester, and that's kind of almost the birthplace of the rave scene. Unfortunately, well, as the film would have it, they never really made a lot of money out of the club or the records. Unfortunately, he didn't sign any sort of proper contracts with the bands. Well, he signed a contract in his own blood, basically saying that the band still owned all their music, which obviously made it a little bit difficult for him to make too much money out of it. And then in the club, the biggest seller probably is the alcohol in a club, but ecstasy was so rife that everyone was on that and wasn't really drinking much at the bar. So again, the club didn't do very well financially either. But everyone had a great time.
It's a bit like a lad's mag, this movie, a bit like Loaded. It's a bit kind of anarchic, loud, and very in your face, I find, this movie. It's very full on. I really enjoy this film. I love the energy of this film. I mean, we're both music fans as well as film fans. And although personally, growing up in the 90s, I was more into the kind of American, the metal and the grunge scenes and things like that. I've always liked punk music as well from this country. But then I found this film and the one really stood out for me in this film was Happy Mondays and the song Hallelujah, although the remix version of Hallelujah, which really just kind of blew me away. And then this kind of opened me up to a lot more music. So this film means quite a lot to me in that way, I suppose. We've got an amazing back catalogue of bands and artists that have come out of this country, not just in Manchester. I mean, Manchester was interesting because there's so many bands that came out of Manchester, whether you like them or you hate them, so many, and a lot of them linked to this and a lot of them kind of other periods and other stuff as well. It was quite amazing. I mean, obviously we had Liverpool, we had the Beatles from Liverpool. Birmingham obviously had a lot of heavy metal bands came out of Birmingham. Sheffield had kind of a lot of post-punk coming out of Sheffield, and then London, of course. But I think this country is really interesting for music, especially over the last 40 years. And what I really like about this film, I think it shows the energy of that music. Although it's a film about Tony Wilson, and obviously Steve Coogan is kind of the star of the film, he's all over the movie, it's also a film about the scene and that time. And I think it really shows, and that's what I really enjoy about this film. It's not just about, it could have been Steve Coogan, it could have been like Alan Partridge all over this, but it's not. I mean, there are moments in there which are a little bit Alan Partridge-y, I think. It's interesting because the film's quite interesting because it just splits. So the whole time that this was happening, Tony Wilson was also carrying on his Granada TV career. And so they kind of splice in, you'll get moments of like Happy Mondays playing a gig, and it'll be spliced in with Tony Wilson talking about a canal, which is very, very boring, but it's kind of, I think it's a nice way of doing the two. But I think those scenes feel a little bit like Alan Partridge because they're quite comical. The rest of the time, it feels like Steve Coogan being Tony Wilson. But I don't think he steals the show completely. And I think the music and the scene, and I think the fact that they put a lot of other things, they put obviously a lot of the bands, a lot of the music is in there, but also they touch on the graphic art. You see Peter Saville, who he came up with all the graphic design of the club and all the different album covers. It doesn't just centre on one thing. Like a lot of biopics do, they'll just centre on the person they're doing the film on and kind of skip over other things. But this one really pulls everything in together, and it kind of gives it this energy, which I think is really great.
Obviously Steve Coogan is something of an impressionist, and he could have really gone over the top with it and tried to completely mimic Tony Wilson. It sounds just enough like him that you can buy into him being Tony Wilson, but not too much where it becomes like a caricature. And also the way it's filmed, like you said, it's quite kinetic and fast paced and in your face, and it cuts around a lot, and it's filmed on like DV cameras, so the footage is quite grainy and low quality. It looks like it's from the 90s and the 80s because of the quality of it. And obviously there is sort of archive footage of some of these bands playing, so that's not quite as jarring when they cut that in, because obviously that's of poor quality as well for the most part. Even that's quite well done. When he goes to see the Sex Pistols, you see them come out on the stage, but they're never really, they're just in the background. So they're obviously actors playing the band, and then when you see close-ups, it is actual footage of the Sex Pistols. So that was quite well done.
That's what's really good with this film. There's a lot of that going on. There's a lot of splicing in, like with the Happy Mondays, you get the actors playing the Happy Mondays, and then they've actually got footage of the Happy Mondays, and you're never quite sure, am I watching the actors or am I watching the actual band itself? Again, I think that really brings this energy into the film, that the fact that you're jumping around so much. And obviously it has a very documentary style to it. Yeah. And it's quite interesting because a lot of times, the camera follows Steve Coogan and the other actors around as though there are cameras following him around. Yeah, but there aren't supposed to be cameras following around. Obviously, he does break the fourth wall quite a lot. And he turns to camera and he does a lot of talking to camera, which I think fits. I mean, again, that's something that maybe possibly couldn't have worked. I think the fact that he was a TV presenter and he liked talking to the camera really helps it. I mean, I watched a really interesting interview with Michael Winterbottom, and he was talking about how to tell this story, and he realised that Tony Wilson was someone who loved to tell stories himself, so that's why they did this film in this way. The film is kind of a big mixture of facts and fiction, and Tony Wilson, I think, was a character who had extremely intelligent, very intellectual. He had loads of great anecdotes from his life, and he was able to just kind of throw them all over it. And there's a lot of stuff in here where, you don't know if it's real or it's not. But the nice thing here is, because I think that's the trouble with a lot of biopictures, is sometimes, they do, obviously they don't know everything that happened and they have to make stuff up. But a lot of the times you just don't believe them. But here they actually tell you, at the beginning of the film, they basically tell you that some of this is false. And they throw things in there that they just turn around and say, this actually didn't happen. And I think that makes this film feel legit, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because a lot of time you'll watch Bohemian Rhapsody as an example. You watch that and think, oh, that's how it happened. But then after the film, you then read, oh no, these things happened years apart, or this never happened, or this conversation never took place, or this conversation was between different people, and things like that. And you think, and you feel a little bit cheated. I mean, obviously it's a film and they're going to dramatise things, but when the film is upfront about that and says, this might not have happened, or this definitely didn't happen, or this happened in this way, okay, then you just go with it.
No, exactly. And I think in this case it makes it more genuine. I usually have quite a bit of a problem with biopictures, especially about music. Obviously music's something that's very close to a lot of people, and to get it wrong is almost sacrilege a lot of times. I find there's a kind of a theme with biopics is that you do, here's the bit where this happens, and here's the bit where they all have the big drug overdose, and here's the bit that that happens, here's the bit where they all lose their money. Do you know what they feel a bit like kind of paint by number films a lot of the time? I haven't seen Bohemian Rhapsody, so I can't speak about
I mean, I would say that would probably, you would probably say the same about that, because it is very much, here's this event that everybody knows about, here's this event, and then obviously ends with the Live Aid thing that I remember watching on the TV when it happened.
Yeah, I'm not saying that makes it a bad film, but I think in this film that you don't get that. It's much more, and because they throw in so many other things, like I said, a bit of the graphic artist and the different bands and the different venues and also it's a lot of it was shot in the real locations. I think it makes it more genuine, and it also makes it quite anarchic. I think this is a very anarchic film. Plus, I think what's quite good here is they seem to have had a lot of cooperation with the actual people of the time, right down to the fact that a lot of them are actually in the film.
Tony Wilson himself is in there.
Tony Wilson himself is in there for a blink and you miss it shot. I'm a big fan of Sid and Nancy, the Alex Cox film about Sid Vicious, but John Lydon from the Sex Pistols has always been very kind of negative about that film. He says a lot of it didn't happen, and yeah, probably a lot of it didn't happen, but it is a film. I like music and I like film, so I can like both of them. I like the Sex Pistols and I like Sid and Nancy.
I'm the same with the Doors. I know that Ray Manzarek and the other surviving Doors didn't like it and said a lot of it was made up, etc., etc. But it still stands up as a great film, great performance by Val Kilmer. You can enjoy these things separately without taking it as gospel that everything is on screen actually happened.
Yeah, and also this film has a really great supporting cast to it as well, which helps. And there's all kinds of names in this film that kind of crop up. Paddy Considine's in this film, and he's amazing in this film. He's a force to be reckoned with, should we say, as he often is in films. So he plays Rob Gretton, who was Joy Division and New Order's manager for many years. Yeah, he's kind of got a side to him which you kind of don't want to piss off, basically. No. And I think there were many times when Tony Wilson seems to almost piss someone off, and I think Paddy Considine, but he shows that same that same kind of fuse that he has in Dead Man's Shoes as well. That kind of there's that great scene in Dead Man's Shoes which we covered on the channel where he near the beginning of the film and he really goes for someone. And there is that in this film as well. And a lot of the times, because I think Michael Winterbottom is a director that allows the cast to just kind of improvise and do what they like, you're never quite sure when you watch a scene. There's a great moment in this where he basically attacks Tony Wilson. They go into the new offices for Factory Records, and Tony Wilson has spent a lot of money on a table. And Paddy Considine's character, he just goes for him. And you watch it and you're like, now was that set up? Did Steve Coogan know that was going to happen? And you kind of, it feels very genuine, it feels very, but it feels improvised, and it's a great moment, and he's really great in this film. And then you've got, Simon Pegg is in there, he turns up, and Peter Kay.
Christopher Eccleston's in it briefly.
There's people playing themselves, there's people who were from the time playing other characters. Howard Devoto, who was from the Buzzcocks, he crops up, he's basically cleaning a toilet sink, and he says something, he refers to something that's just happened that maybe did or didn't happen. So there's little things like that. There's loads of things in here, and I think that's what's great. There's so much going on in this film, but it all fits in together, and I think it's a really great film, and I really enjoyed it. And you enjoyed it. You hadn't seen it before.
Oh, did you? Obviously, I'd heard of it, was aware of it, and what it was about and who it was about, but no, it just one of those films I've just never seen. I actually had it recorded on my Skybox from Film 4 when it was on. I think they showed it because obviously Michael Winterbottom and Steve Coogan had reunited to make Greed.
Well, they've done. They obviously did The Trip together as well.
Yeah. Well, Rob Brydon's in this as well as a journalist who keeps harassing Tony Wilson.
John Sim is in there as well, and he's a great actor too. He plays one of the members of New Order. Shirley Henderson, who was in Trainspotting before this, she's in there. Just a really great cast, and it feels like it's a really genuine, fun, early 2000s, chaotic, anarchic look at a certain time of musical history in this country.
I think it's worth mentioning Sean Harris's portrayal of Ian Curtis as well, which was pretty good. Obviously, there was a film specifically made about him a few years ago called Troll with Sam Riley as Ian Curtis. They're quite different portrayals. He was a bit more... I haven't seen Control for a while. I saw it a few years ago. I don't remember a lot about it, but I don't remember Ian Curtis being maybe quite as nasty as he is in this film. He was a bit more sympathetic, but then I guess he obviously is the main character in that film, so if you make him too horrible, then people are going to be turned off by that. But Sean Harris's portrayal, he's a little bit vicious perhaps, particularly when he first meets Tony Wilson. He's pretty nasty to him. Kind of elements of Ian Curtis in both the portrayals, both in looks, they both look like him in certain ways. Sean Harris has definitely got his dance moves down, that's for sure.
It is very striking performance, and I saw Control as well when it came out. I had it on DVD, so I've seen it a few times. Obviously, that was made by Anton Corbin, who was a photographer who actually photographed Joy Division back in the day. But I think I was reading a few people were saying Sam Riley got the look of him down. He looks more like him. If you look at photographs of the two of them, he's more similar in that aspect. But Sean Harris kind of got the essence of him. So if you put the two of them together, I think Control's a great film. It's a little bit more melodramatic, and again, like I said, it's a little bit more like a biopic. Those kind of classic biopics that I'm not so keen on, but it's a very good film in its own right. You kind of put the two of them together, and they both kind of make an Ian Curtis. And obviously, if you're portraying someone in a fictional sense, you can put some of yourself into that role. And I think Steve Coogan did the same with Tony Wilson. There is some of Steve Coogan in there as well, and obviously that's going to happen. Unless you completely are a method actor and completely turn into that person. There is actually on the Blu-ray, there's some deleted scenes, and Sam Riley was actually in this film himself. He played Marky Smith, which they cut out. Although weirdly, Marky Smith is actually in the film as well, playing himself. So that would have been a bit weird.
Andy Serkis was really good as well as Martin Hammett, the producer.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I don't know what he was like in real life. You can't completely trust how the film portrays him, but yeah, he was a hard-drinking, pretty erratic guy. It's just, it's a who's who of British actors, really. Keith Allen in there, and Dave Gorman, and Peter Kay, and Lenny James.
Yeah, it is, like you said, it's a who's who of both British film and British TV as well. There's some really, really great people in here. And I mean, Andy Serkis not in there much. I mean, he plays quite a definitive character in that scene. He was the producer and he produced a lot of music that was on Factory, but he's not in the film a lot. He's just another character that's in that story. I mean, also a lot of these people have since died. I mean, even Tony Wilson died. He died in 2007. Martin Hammett, I think, died in 1991. So a lot of these guys have since, Rob Gretton, he passed away too. So they're not around anymore, and that makes, obviously, when this film was made, it was made before Tony Wilson died. So obviously now it is a bit more iconic in that way. Obviously, we've gone back into lockdown in this country, so we're kind of looking at films that are on Amazon Prime, and that's where we saw this one. Although I do actually have it on Blu-ray. I had it on DVD and have it on Blu-ray as well now. And this is great because this has got there's quite a lot on here actually. There's 24 deleted scenes, quite a lot from the movie. Mainly there's not much of Steve Coogan. It's mainly the guys playing Happy Mondays, trying to play Happy Mondays in garages and on stages and things like that. But it's quite fun. And then there's lots of interviews with people who were connected to this time, journalists and the musicians. Happy Mondays are on there, and that's really interesting, kind of talking about the scene. And that's kind of what's interesting about when you have a film about a music scene. There's not much on here about the film, but there is a lot about the scene that it's portraying.
Yeah,
so there's a lot about the music. That's kind of more, that encapsulates more of the Blu-ray than the actual film does. Although there is a kind of a small featurette on the making of. They're talking to Michael Winterbottom about his process and his thought process on making films, and they're kind of talking to him while this film is being made. So there's a few shots, mainly in the hacienda, when they're filming the stuff in there. It's a perfectly good. I picked this up on Amazon for about £6.
Obviously, like I say, it was filmed on DV cameras, so it's only ever going to look so good. I think obviously standard definition and stuff like that. So it's never going to be reference material to put on your great big telly. But yeah, it's I'm sure it's perfectly fine. I watched it recording of Film 4, which was it didn't look amazing, but yeah, it's as good as it's ever going to look because that was the look intended. There is a release in the US on Blu-ray which is in 24 frames a second, which isn't quite right because it was actually filmed at 25 frames a second. So it's a bit like if you go back and look at our Threads video, that had the same situation. That was filmed in 25 frames a second in PAL, and the American Blu-ray is in 24 frames a second. So if that kind of thing bothers you, then see if you can pick up the UK disc, if you have the capabilities to play that. To be honest, the Blu-ray probably doesn't look that much better than the DVD because of the limits of the source material. Yeah,
I'm not as geeky, I think, about that as you are. I mean, obviously I like the film to look playable, and obviously the ratio needs to be correct.
Yeah, that is the look. That is the intended look. That's how it was filmed. That's how it was made. That's what it's supposed to look like.
Excellent. Well, I mean, I recommend. I think we both recommend. If you like this scene and if you don't know this movie, I mean, it's a pretty famous movie. I think when it came out, it was highly respected. A lot of people liked it. I think Roger Ebert even gave it like 4 stars. But I think it's one that's maybe slightly slipped away over the years. If you like this scene, or if you're interested in this scene, then it's definitely one to. I definitely recommend giving it a go. But I would also, if you're interested in things like Joy Division, I actually watched because I noticed this obviously was on Amazon Prime. There's a documentary also on Amazon Prime about Joy Division, which I watched last night as well, and that's really good, really well done, and features members of the band talking on it, and Tony Wilson is in there as well. That's well worth a watch as well. If you happen to now feel like a Night of Joy Division and the Manchester scene or the Manchester scene, do check that out as well. And that was 24-Hour Party, people. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, let us know in the comments below.
Hit the subscribe button over here and don't forget to push the bell for notifications. There's other videos to check out over here. Come and find us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, and join us next week for another video.